Heyo, it's Editing Cap here. I'm sorry if my voice sounds weird in this clip or anything like that. I'm gonna be honest, my mic is kind of breaking, so it's really hard to get the sound reduction and everything like that, the background noise reduction to work. Because yeah, it's kind of doing this like weird clicking thing. I don't really know how to explain it. It sounds sort of like TV static, so the mic might sound weird because I'm trying to avoid that getting into the footage. I'm definitely going to have to use some of that sweet, sweet Patreon money to get a new one. But please enjoy the video. I'm sorry if you can hear my clicks or anything like that, or if my hiccups sound weird. But yeah, thank you. Hey everyone, it's Kep here. This is going to be a video about the Thalys. This is a very unique melee weapon, especially comparing it to other Incarnons like the Skana Incarnon, which can feel a little bit uninspired. This one has a lot of different things going on, however, not in the way that you typically think. Normally, it's the Incarnon form that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. In this particular case, I don't actually think that the Incarnon perk is super duper strong. It's what we gain access to in the Incarnon form that really brings out its really interesting potential, aka the buffs that we get in the Incarnon form allow us to do a lot more stuff. Plus the unique heavy attacks that we get with Gale Force Dawn and its neutral attack are going to really synergize with the kind of build that we're making, and you can do some really, really interesting stuff. I do think, personally, that Melee Afflictions is actually quite a bit stronger than Melee Influence, especially because that's a lot of what I've been seeing going around. I think that there's a lot of latent power that you have to draw out of the weapon. It's very hurting for mod slots, but if you can give it the buffs that it wants, then you can make it really perform. For the first showcase, I'm going to swap off of Kalervo, and I'm just going to do a very neutral showcase with a all-rounder build that you could just throw on any Warframe. And then I'm going to show you a build that's more specialized towards a Warframe like Kalervo or Veruna, who are really specializing in buffing melee. Before we get into the video though, I do want to say a very special thank you to my Patreon members. In the Heirloom Tomato tier, we have Trash Goblin, The Law, Mr. Anonymous, Classel, Astra, and Amnesty. In the Beefsteak Tomato tier, we have Rowan Mabot, Heather, Charger, Eonerd, Ak, and 10VY, and in the Cherry Tomato tier, we have Woland, Squeaky, Dara, and Grug. Your support means the world to me. Thank you guys so much. So, we are going to head over to the arsenal, and I'm going to swap over to Caliban because I know that he won't be buffing any of our damage. So swap over to Caliban here. We do have a group of enemies already summoned. I'm going to use a slide attack to gain some combo. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to activate my Incarnon form. You're going to see over here that there's going to be a blue flash that's going to spawn on these enemies, and that's the shard coming out of them. That's the Incarnon perk. These shards will deal extra damage when they're given to an enemy. In the Incarnon description, it states that it's 75% of the hit that dealt it. I don't actually know if that's true. In my opinion, it does seem like they're not doing a ton of damage. On top of the fact that the Thalys does have a fairly low melee follow-through, it can feel very weak when you're hitting a lot of enemies. However, if we can get a heavy attack and some combo going, you'll see really quickly that this can get really, really strong. There we go. So every enemy that gets knocked down, and you see we have these really, really strong gas buffs that are going to start forming. As we run around and get our Tenokine more and more, this will really start to pronounce itself, and we also have a neutral combo that is able to hit headshots. You can see over there that we did just hit a 1.6 million gas proc damage. So it is a very interesting weapon, and while the initial value of melee influence might be higher than something like melee afflictions, it's what happens when you can really start to get this buff going. As you can see over there, that was a lot of damage. It's sort of inconsistent at times. Sometimes it feels like the stars need to align a little bit. However, if we give this to a Warframe who can buff melee, specifically like Kalervo, you'll see really quickly that the setup will scale much faster and much higher than any melee influence setup would. So it is a very unique and interesting playstyle. Oh my god, that heavy gunner was just leaning on the on the guard railing over there. I am going to show you the build, and before I show you the build really quickly, I'm going to go over the Incarnon perks, and I'm going to show you why I'm choosing these ones, and then we can go more into the build and explain some stuff from there. If we click on the first evolution over here, it's kind of weird. I think that they actually didn't finish the description for it, because if you look in the mod menu of the Thalys, it gives a much more detailed description, so it's a little bit weird here. But it reads as such: attacks embed damaging shards in enemies, with no period, which makes me think that it's not finished. What we do gain, however, is plus 3 meters of range and plus 40% attack speed, which is pretty good for an Incarnon buff. There's a lot of attack speed and a lot of range. This weapon can feel really slow in its normal form, so having that plus 40% attack speed on top of Prime Fury really makes it a much faster weapon, especially because Gale Force on can feel a little uncomfortable with slower melee combos, or not melee combos, but melee speed, so it helps a lot to boost that attack speed. In the Evolution 2, we have Dreadful Reach. There are 3 other options here, or 2, I guess. Dreadful Reach says, on weapon status effect, gain plus 0.1 range for 8 seconds, which stacks up to 20 times. This is going to give us 2 meters of range once it's fully stacked up, and this thing does have a pretty good status chance at 24%, so we're going to be proccing this basically all the time. Whirling Flurry is going to give us a base 20% attack speed, which is quite nice. So, I mean, if the weapon does feel as though it is a little bit slow, you can put this on and it will help quite a bit. Going from 0.9 to 1.1 is really, really nice, especially because that is the base attack speed. However, I don't think it's particularly useful for this build because we're going to be going into our Incarnon form really, really quickly, as you'll see with the evolutions next. Raging Drift is also very interesting, and it does have a synergy with the next evolution that I'm going to talk about in a second, but the description goes, plus 80% attack speed while sliding and plus 20% slide. So you will slide farther and you'll attack much, much faster while you're sliding. It is really, really interesting to see this in action. Having, more attack speed on the slide attack was not something I initially, assumed, but it is pretty cool to see. Those slide attacks will come out really, really fast. However, for the video, we're going to use Dreadful Reach. In Evolution 3, we have Nimble Scythe. This is the Incarnon perk that I said would synergize with Raging Drift over here. And basically, for every enemy hit by a slide attack, it will gain plus 5 combo, which is really nice. We also have Echoes of Rage, which will give a combo count on shard damage, so it is going to give extra combo as you spawn those shards, which is quite nice. And then we also have Adapt Reflexes, which is just going to give us a flat 20 initial combo, which is pretty good in my opinion. However, I do think that Nimble Scythe is quite a bit better, specifically because even without that attack speed buff, we are able to gain a lot of combo in a single heavy attack, even if we're not hitting that many enemies with it. It is really nice to find sort of a clumped up crowd of enemies and just use a slide attack into them to get your combo up. It's really, really convenient. I think it's much faster than any of the other options here, especially when we combine it with something like Swift Transmute, which means that instead of having to reach 6x combo to gain access to our Incarnon form, we only need to reach 3x combo. I think that this feels quite a bit better, especially because it can feel really slow in its base form, so just being able to use a slide attack or two and then suddenly being able to get into your Incarnon feels a lot better than more, of the other more active or interesting perks over here. The other perk that we have access to is Vaulting Leap, which is going to be plus 100% jump and double jump height. Now, this is a little interesting. I think it is actually really cool. You do jump quite a bit higher, but this feels like they want you to go with a slam build with this kind of perk. I don't think that there's another melee Incarnon that has a perk quite like this one. But you would initially assume that they want you to do the double jump and then have the slam, which, sounds cool in theory and all, but I'm going to say this right now, like, I really feel as though this is not a slam weapon. Devastating Mercy over here is very interesting, however, I think it's actually completely useless. The reason is that our heavy attack has a lot of range, especially if we're using the dedicated weapons platform build. We have 14 meters of range on our heavy attack. This only knocks enemies down in a 6-meter radius. So our heavy attack is going to knock enemies down anyways. This one requires a ground finisher to knock enemies down, but only in a 6-meter radius. So it doesn't feel very balanced compared to what we can do with just the base weapon itself, especially because we're getting that plus 3 meters range and plus 2 meters range from just having the Incarnon form active and just using the weapon. It doesn't feel worth it to knock enemies down like that. I would assume that they probably put this in to help people build up melee crescendo for a heavy attack build, but because the shards aren't applied on a heavy attack, it really feels like you should be using a normal attack and then a heavy attack to detonate those shards. So, for the time being, we're going to use Swift Transmute because I think it's a very good quality of life, especially for melee Incarnons, which can sometimes feel very slow to build up. In the Evolution 5, we have Chain Shatter selected. Heavy attacks detonate shards. Shards caught within the blast radius will also detonate. This is really nice because it does feel like it's going to be doing some amount of substantial damage. I feel as though the other perks that we have access to don't deal that much damage, and the splinters that come out of the enemy themselves also feel like they're lacking in a little bit of damage. It could just be me, or it could just be the weaker follow-through that this weapon has. I personally think that Chain Shatter is probably the best, and I have tested the other ones out, and they are very interesting, but I think that it's just not the greatest. The other option we have over here, Void Splinters, is very interesting, but I really think that this needs a buff. Shard duration is increased to 30 seconds. Shards become weak spots that have a 100% critical chance when damaged. Shard damage is reduced by minus 50%. So you would initially assume that this would be something like Citrine's Augment. When you hit the shard, you'll get that crit chance. However, it's only 100%, and it's not a flat crit buff like Arcane Avenger, which makes it really kind of weak. The critical chance in the Incarnon form is still going to be 30%, so this is only going to double that to 60, which means if this was a flat 100% crit chance, you could offload one of your crit chance mods in turn of something else like range and have a really, really fun time being able to get the crit chance hiccup being able to get the crit chance off these shards and sort of, you know, have a more balanced build because of it. But this is only 100%, and it reduces your shard damage, which is already really low, so I really don't think that Void Splinters should be chosen. I don't know. I don't think it's that great. It's modded crit chance, at least from my testing. I've never been able to hit an orange crit with it, so as far as I can tell, it is not really worth it to use. I mean, the crit chance is nice, but it's only 100%. Like, what the heck? It should be like way more. If it is modded crit chance, it should be something like 400% or something stupid like that. Or just make it flat, and then we can have the flat 100% crit chance buff that works like Arcane Avenger and will apply to all of your melee slings. That sounds much more reasonable to me. This just doesn't seem like it's it. Explosive growth is very interesting though. Shards grow whenever a new shard is created up to 3 times. Fully grown shards erupt out of the embedded enemy, dealing ×2 damage and impaling them on the spot. What this perk doesn't tell you is that you need to hit, I think, about 3 or 4 enemies for the impaling to hit the enemy. And the reason this is cool is because, yeah, they get impaled and they get CC'd, but we also get more shard damage in general, which is nice because the shards will erupt out of the embedded enemy. But as I said, the shard damage really doesn't feel like it's that good. The explosion from Chain Shatter does seem to be doing like a pretty good amount of chunk damage, whereas the explosive growth also feels a little bit lackluster. Impaling them is cool and all, but it only really impales them for like 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds, which is kind of unfortunate because our heavy attack, once again, will knock down enemies, and it will take longer than 1.5 seconds for them to get up from that knockdown. So we have better CC in general from using Chain Shatter in just a heavy attack than using explosive growth, especially because you do need to hit multiple enemies for them to be impaled by those Void Splinters. Once again, I think this needs a buff. I think the entire Incarnon tree, or not the Incarnon tree, but the Incarnon form, those shards really do need to do more. And maybe it's because I'm fighting primarily armored targets, but I really don't feel the shard damage when it comes to this weapon. It's more so the range and the attack speed that we're getting in the interesting parts of the combos that we can use for melee afflictions. This just doesn't seem to be super duper good. They're very interesting. They're very unique. This is probably one of the most interesting, evolution options that we've gotten for a melee weapon, especially because the Incarnon tree is, odd, and we've never seen something like this before. But yeah, they just don't feel like they're keeping up with a lot of other melee weapons in the game. For the build, though, it is going to be fairly straightforward, except for the fact that we're going to be running gas. First of all, we have the combo, the stance mod, which is Gale Force Dawn. I really, really hope that we can sometime get another heavy scythe stance, because Gale Force Dawn really doesn't feel that great. It is a very clunky stance mod. If you give it enough attack speed, which you do happen to have access to, then it can start to feel quite a bit better. But in general, just like, right? It's not, I don't know, if it doesn't feel quite as, fluid as something like an Icona stance or something like that. For the Tenukai, we actually have Opportunities Reach here, and this is this is going to be the start of where we start to pile up a lot of range on this, because this is going to give us another 3 meters for our heavy attack. Essentially, when we reach that Tennokai, it's going to be about a 15% to get that Tennokai, but when we do hit it, we're going to be able to have a huge AoE. This gets even larger with the dedicated weapons build because, as I said, the Thalys kind of feels like it has mod slot syndrome, and you want to fit so many different mods into here, but you kind of can't. It's really unfortunate. Prime Fury here is just to buff up our general attack speed. In our Incarnon form, it goes up to 1.79, which is really nice. That is actually really quite fast, especially for wide arcing hits. Once again, though, the follow through is only 40%. That really sucks. I desperately need them to make it so that the Incarnon form gains a bunch of follow through. This could be as strong as Nami Solo Incarnon, and Nami Solo Incarnon is really strong. This could be at that level or better if its follow through was nicer. It's 40% is not enough for a weapon that it has so much range on it. Even though we're hitting with melee afflictions, sometimes the damage just won't do anything. You'll see very low damage numbers if you're hitting a dense crowd of enemies because the follow through is just cutting that damage by 40% every single time. It's really unfortunate. I think that this was a massive fumble in terms of weapon balancing. I think that Thalys is a good weapon, but it's not the best, right? But it is very fun. However, once again, as I said, if you give it the things that it wants, like, you know, Wrathful Advance and crit damage and stuff like that, it will perform really well. It just struggles a lot to have everything it wants at the same time. There's a lot of buffing that we need to do to get it to, you know, perform the way we want it to. Like, you could put 1000% damage on a Stug and it's still going to be a Stug, right? But you could put 1000% damage on a Thalys and it's going to be much better. You just need to sort of fiddle with it, right? You need to do a little secret handshake and then suddenly this weapon will start performing the way that it should. We have Weeping Wounds and Galvanized Elementalist for status damage and status chance. This should get us to about a 180% status chance on once everything's stacked up, so that's pretty good, which means that we're basically always going to be applying gas, which is exactly what we want. Galvanized Steel over here is really nice just because it's going to give us a base critical chance on top of the Blood Rush, even though the percent increase is only about 33% from Galvanized Steel. The crit damage is going to be 120%, which is higher than the 90 that you would typically find from Organ Shatter. So you do need to work a little bit for your crit damage, but it's going to be active for 20 seconds, which means it's going to be really easy to keep this up. You basically need to get one melee kill every 20 seconds in order to keep this buff up. So it's not hard to upkeep at all, and it's just going to be better performance in the long run. Blood Rush as well is going to give us all the crit chance we need, and we can occasionally hit red crits because the crit chance of the Thalys is going to be about 30%, so having the 440% critical chance, you know, with 30% base is going to give us quite a bit. Condition Overload is really nice just because we are going to be applying, you know, a decent amount of status effects, but realistically, if you look at it, we have Puncture, Slash, and Gas. Prime Pressure Point is only 165%. You know, 80 times 3 is going to be higher than 165, so it is going to be more worthwhile because we're just going to be applying a lot of status effects. On top of the fact that we can use something like Doriga to increase that base damage even more, I think that running Condition Overload in general is just a smarter idea, even though it does need a little bit more upkeep. This is not a weapon that's going to be immediately good. You have to let it warm up. You have to let it get the kills it needs, and then it will start to really perform. Prime Fever Strike and Molten Impact here are just trying to boost the base damage of the weapon as much as possible. We don't need to use 60/60 mods because we want to keep that status weighting as high as possible. As you can see over here, we're at 17.2% gas, status weighting, which means that we're going to be very primarily proccing gas, which is exactly what we want because we're going to be using melee afflictions. I do think that melee influence is better earlier. Melee influence feels as though it is going to give you more of a benefit with less investment. However, if you can give this weapon investment and you can give it, you know, 6 Forma and all of these mods and stuff like that, then it will really start to perform and you can sort of draw it out. But if you're newer to the game or something like that, or you maybe don't have access to all these mods and they're not maxed out, then definitely I think melee influence is just going to be the best way to run it. But that's only for early game. Melee afflictions will scale quite a bit later and it will help you with things like ETA and EDA, and it will even go to level cap up, especially if you're running the weapons platform build. Melee Affliction scales very aggressively, especially with gas procs. I don't know, there's some weird math about it, but I just know that, you know, gas and afflictions has always sort of been the wombo combo, so having these two together is really, really nice. I'm once again just going to show you another weapons test with this before I put it away. Ooh, all these guys are knocked around. And then I'm going to show you the Kalervo build. Well, I'm not going to show you the Kalervo build, but I'm going to show you the build that's meant for sort of a more melee hiccup melee platform, you know, centric kind of thing. So we're still building up our melee crit damage and stuff like that, but now that we have 12 times combo and our galvanized steel is all built up and our galvanized elementals is up too, you see over here that life is going to be pretty nice. We just do a couple of slide attacks, we get our thing, and we can come over here and have a really big AoE, and these enemies will just kind of fall over and die. Not bad damage by any means, but it's not great, and we have seen weapons like Okina and Incarnon do much better. Plus, the 15% chance from opportunities reach can occasionally feel like it's not proccing at all. I would not blame you at all if you just wanted to keep whatever range we have on this weapon and then use, you know, combat, or not combat discipline, discipline's merit, there we go, and use discipline's merit to get the guaranteed 4 hit Tennokai, because yeah, it kind of feels like it needs a lot. You're going to see over here that we're hitting a lot of really small numbers, 88 or 106, and that's because of the really low follow through. We're hitting so many enemies at once that we're just going to be doing diminishing damage, you know, to enemies in the back, which is nice because we're still doing damage to them, and affliction still will proc with our heavy attack, but like, once again, a very missed opportunity to increase the follow through of this weapon, especially when you give it access to so much range. It is kind of, you know, contradicting itself in what it wants to be. Unfortunately, with the current state of the meta in the game, it really feels like a lot of weapons are pushing you towards melee influence, which just kind of sucks, in my opinion. I really think we need more diversity, especially for melee arcanes, because it really feels like it boils down to crescendo, afflictions, exposure, and duplicate, but even barely a duplicate, right? So we really only have like 1, 2, 3 arcanes that we really primarily work with, and it's very hard to find something to use Zodi with. It's very hard to find something that justifies melee crescendo because we have galvanized what's it called? The galvanized heavy attack efficiency mod that gives you initial combo. I forget what it's called. Like, we have that, and duplicate is not good unless you're using it with something like glaives or anything like that. Specifically because the crit damage that we get from gaining a crit tier on orange crits actually outweighs the duplicate damage, which really sucks. So we really basically have influence, exposure, and afflictions to play with, and afflictions, being the tank buster arcane that we have, doesn't affect overguarded enemies or CC immune enemies anymore. So it's like, what's the point of this arcane, right? The only one that really exists is melee influence, unless you're doing a slam build, then you can do melee exposure for the extra base damage, or something like on the Siam if you really wanted the extra base damage. It's like, all these need buffs. We need buffs for all of these melee arcanes. They are too hard to access, and influence is just that strong, right? So it kind of sucks. But it doesn't suck if we use Kalervo. Now, Kalervo kind of has a funny habit of making just about any melee weapon in this game good. However, in this particular case, it makes it really strong. The reason it makes it really strong is because we can ignore crit damage and we can ignore crit chance mods, which means we can fit in new mods over here, i.e. primed reach and opportunities reach combined with discipline's merit. Combining these 3 mods together draws out a lot of that latent potential, because we don't care about what our modded crit chance on the weapon is, and we don't care about what our crit damage on the weapon is, because we are fulfilling those things with our Warframe buffs, i.e., I know I already said i.e., but, you know, these crit damage shards and the 508% that we get from Wrathful Advance. Now you'll see that our Tennokai is going to happen way more often, and it's going to have the full 14 meters range for the melee afflictions. It's going to be really strong. Much more effective. We're already in our Incarnon form, and you'll see over here that we have a huge melee reach. This is about 13.8 meters, so just about 14 meters of heavy attack range because of opportunities reach. If we want to see what 14 meters looks like, that is 14 meters. So from that point there, over here, that's how big our melee heavy attack is. It's kind of insane. Such a large area that it hits in. It's really, really silly in my opinion. We can once again just build up our combo and then hit everyone in front of us, and these guys are hit over here too. It is really, really silly. And the fact that we're proccing gas and it's affliction scaling gas damage, it's going to mean that those gas bubbles are going to do a ton and a ton. This is without roar, and this is without any kind of buff like that, and it's still going to rip through these enemies. It's just kind of a showcase on how the Thalys wants to be a really functional and interesting weapon. However, you kind of need to give it... Heyo, it's Editing Cap here. I just wanted to pop in and say, it turns out that the shard damage themselves have 0 crit chance, just at all. However, they still do benefit from flat crit chance like Wrathful Advance, which means that the explosions can crit with Wrathful Advance active. It's why Kullervo feels so strong with this weapon, and why the shard damage feels so lackluster unless you're using him in particular, or a Warframe with Wrathful Advance, or a frame that has some kind of flat crit rate, like Harrow, or using Arcane Avenger. Thank you so much to Xenosfire for his short on this, because I had no idea, and he's the only person I've seen who said this, so he's super cool. Go and check him out. I actually love Xenosfire a lot. You know, a little nudge in that direction. But once you do, it starts to become really, really powerful. I think, you know, the best way to run this is with Kullervo and Varuna. I mean, any melee weapon is going to be better to run with Kullervo or Varuna. But this one, in this particular case, has a lot of power that we just kind of need to squeeze out of it, and a Warframe buff is going to have to be the only way we can do that. Once again, it feels like we don't have enough mod slots, and it feels like the arcanes in general are a little too shifted towards playing in a certain way, when Afflictions on paper is going to be much stronger. And in my opinion, it is quite a bit stronger, especially when you have the setup. It's just influences lower effort, lower investment, and will do kind of similar damage at the end of the day. So I think, in my personal opinion, Afflictions is going to be the better option for general use and stuff like that. But I wouldn't blame somebody at all for using Influence, because it just seems like it's one of those things that it's kind of like, yeah, you can kind of use both, but Influence makes it a lot easier to do that kind of thing, right? So, all in all, the performance is definitely nothing to scoff at, but it is not the best melee performance in the game. I'm going to go back to Caliban though, and I am going to head over to a Mott mission, and I'm just going to start mowing through enemies with the general use build. I'm going to keep my Summulists up so I don't accidentally spawn any of the Orthless, because the Orthless will just do all the work for me because I'm using the first augment. So yeah, I'll see you there. Okay, so this is going to be the Caliban gameplay, so with the general use version of the build, just so you can kind of see baseline what it's going to look like in an actual game. Mott is really, really dense. It has a ton of enemy spawns, so it'll be nice to just sort of mow through crowds. I will be taking Razor Mortar off, because I think that the grouping is really, really strong. So it might sort of influence how this build looks if you don't have a Warframe that has grouping on it. But without further ado, we are going to load into the mission and see how it goes. I will also only play for a minute or two, because I want to show you what the Kullervo build looks like and just how much better it is. This is being recorded after I put in that little clip with the crit chance thing for the shards, so you'll be able to see really quickly just how much stronger it is. But I'm going to swap to Summulists, and then I'm just going to get all my energy, make sure I don't die, and we're just going to start whacking, basically. You can still see here that without any damage buffs or anything like that, it's still a very, very capable weapon. Definitely nothing to scoff at. As 2.7 million damage rate over there, which is kind of silly. Yeah, damage numbers are definitely not suffering, or anything like that. Even though it is kind of the general use build, you just have a smaller effective radius, so if you wanted to do something like that... Oh, I did actually hit that crewman all the way over here with the range of opportunities reach. That's funny. That's something like a 10-meter melee range. Yeah, you will just absolutely mow through any crowd that you want to. Yeah, 5.8 million right there, so certainly not a weak melee weapon. I really do wish that this forward combo was a little bit better. Not the forward one, but the neutral one. There we go, we got our 10 guy here. Bonk! I am getting invaded by Arbiters of Hexus. Which, if you don't know, I was friends with Arbiters of Hex. I say friends like I know them. I was with Arbiters of Hexes for like over a decade, I think. And then I finally swapped to Perrin and New Loka for the augments, because the augments from them generally tend to sell a little bit higher and a little bit easier, because the majority of the player base is with Seal Meridian and Suda, so that's why I'm getting invaded by them. But I don't know where the hell they are, unless I accidentally killed them. I'm not sure. Yeah, it is a little rough having to play with without Discipline's Merit. It does kind of suck a little bit because that 15% chance does feel like it's barely anything. But when it does proc, it is really, really strong. So I guess in the meantime, if you do see a really, dense group of enemies like this, you can just use your main attack. That enemy got knocked down over there too, so far away. That overhead strike as well, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the gameplay before, but it does hit headshots, so it is really, really strong. That is about 2 minutes 40 seconds. I'm going to come over here and just clear this enemies out. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason for me to, but that was just about 2 minutes 45, so I will do the same time with Kalervo, and you can kind of see the difference of the power of the two builds. Okay, so we are doing the Kalervo part of the gameplay now. And you're going to see pretty quickly just how silly and strong this is. I do have Truculence on my Kalervo, because his new augment actually makes it like extremely viable. So if you do see that, do not, I guess, I don't know, it's really strong. That was 32 million. Oh god, oh god. Oh no, that was 14 million. Oh no, that was 129 million. You can see it's a little stronger. It's a little bit stronger. Yeah, this is probably one of Kalervo's best weapons. And in my full-on Kalervo video explaining everything, this is certainly going to make it in there. I absolutely think that this is, yeah, definitely one of Kalervo's best. Just the gargantuan range that you get off of this, and the affliction scaling, and all the crit buffing, and buffing the crit chance of the shards and everything like that. It gets a little silly, I'm not gonna lie to you. And the worst part is that I'm not even using Collective Curse on these guys, and because the range is so high, it's going to hit all those enemies. And then all that damage is going to get reciprocated back to them because of Collective Curse. That was 153 million right there. So, yeah, a little Kalervo tech, by the way. If you didn't know, you can cast Collective Curse just right after, or right before, I guess, you use a heavy attack. And it will sort of animation cancel it. With some weapons. It's not super great with the Thalys, but if you get the Tanokai, it comes out so much faster. But there's a lot of weapons where it'll just outright cancel the attack of the animation of the heavy attack, and you get some really cool damage. There's Discipline's, not Discipline's Merit, but Opportunity's Reach, extending the amount of time we can keep our Tanokai up. So it's really, really nice that we can save it for a brute. That was 23 million over there. Oh, I didn't get to use this again. Yeah, Kalervo gameplay is a little bit different from the Caliban gameplay. As you can see, this is just a silly, silly weapon once you give it the juice. Yeah, crazy range, by the way. I kind of want to showcase the range a little bit more if I can get Discipline's Merit to proc. Okay, so you see that enemy over there? They get hit all the way over there. That's how far our range is. Right? That's only 11 meters, by the way. So if we try and find an enemy that's even farther than that, like this guy, they're still getting hit. It's kind of stupid. It's kind of really stupid. It's 4 meters less than influence, and you get afflictions damage. Yeah, So definitely one of Kalervo's best sort of crowd clearing things. I do a roar as well on this particular build. I don't think you need it for Kalervo. I don't think Kalervo really benefits like a ton for more, but it is still fairly silly. It is more damage. You know, Eclipse might be better for raw damage in this case because Kalervo, even though he's the melee frame, does not care too much about slash procs or buffing up that slash procs with faction damage and stuff like that. So don't really need to worry too much about that. But overall, 53 million. Overall, yeah, damage is a lot higher when you're using a Warframe who really leans into the strength of the weapon. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm gonna head over here, and that should be the video. So I hope you enjoyed. I know this video felt like it was kind of all over the place. The Thalys is a weird weapon, so I guess it gets a weird video. But yeah, I hope you all have a lovely time, and good night, or good morning, or something, I don't know.